But today we're talking about, well, I'm going to share with you one of the greatest pieces of information, of advice that I received going into marriage. And that is to forgive easily and readily. Okay? And basically what it comes down to is when you are married, you and your mate, you and your husband are now sharing a bond that is supposed to be the strongest bond, known to man, that you would have with another person. And through this bond, as I've said before, you're learning about this person very intimately, on very intimate levels. You're learning about the things he likes, the things that he doesn't like, and through this learning, you become vulnerable. Okay, he becomes vulnerable. You now know the things that hurt him very deeply. He may be sharing with you some things that his best friends don't know, things that his parents don't know, things that his siblings don't know. You and him are now in a very, very intimate relationship. And he's vulnerable. You're vulnerable because you do the same thing. You share with him all of your deepest, darkest secrets. You share with him, the things that hurt you, the times that you're not at your best. He sees you in every emotional state possible. So you are vulnerable to him. He is vulnerable to you. So when we talk about forgiveness, we're talking about not saying it, whatever you did to harm me or make me feel bad, not saying that that's okay. We're not giving them a pass on whatever action it was or words that they said that hurt you. What we're saying is, I love you enough to move on. I love you enough not to hold this thing over your head and remind you of it every day and talk about it to my friends and get on Facebook and call my mom. I love you enough to forgive you and move on. So, it's hard in marriage because, like I said, you know each other on a very, very intimate level. But I think when you strip it down to its core, when you strip it down to love in its rawest form, when you're married, the two of you got married because you love each other. So although it's really, really hard to forgive at times, when you think about it, it really shouldn't be. And I've talked to my husband about this because we've talked about forgiveness several times. And I always tell him, like, he'll sometimes he thinks that I do things in spite of him, just to like upset him, or and I have to constantly remind you, I'm like, babe, I love you. Like, I'm never going to do something that I know is going to intentionally get on your nerves or intentionally make you upset with me. Why would I do that? I love you. And so when I do things that hurt you or get on your nerves, please know that it's not intentional. Please know that I'm not trying to make it my life's goal to make you upset today. That's not my goal. I just misstepped. I made an error. I made a mistake. Forgive me. And so my feeling is that when you go into marriage, understanding that the person that you're marrying loves you almost more than anything in this world, but, behind God, you're right there. When you understand that and you believe that, then forgiveness should come more naturally. It should become something that is almost second nature. And one of the things that we do, one of the traps that we fall into in marriage and just in the whole aspect of relationships and forgiveness, is we wait until we feel like we're in a place that we can forgive. We put the feeling of forgiveness before the act of forgiveness. We wait till we feel like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to wait till I feel like forgiving you. Before we actually say, I forgive you. And when you think about it, that defeats the whole purpose. As you know, I'm a Christian woman, and I believe that God died for my sins. And that whole act of love in and of itself, Jesus is sitting up on that cross, getting cursed at, getting stoned, all that stuff, still sitting up there talking about God forgive them for their sins, for they know not what they do. That is the purest, rawest definition of forgiveness and love possible. So when we are sitting up here upset because somebody drank the last of your Starbucks and don't want to forgive, it's like, really, really, come on. We call ourselves loving our husbands, but we want to be upset and hold grudges over some of the most trivial things, and we might say, oh, well, I forgive you. We will give like the, yeah, I forgive you type of response, but we don't truly feel it in our heart. And we think we're getting by telling him we forgive him, but our actions speak louder than words. We begin to withhold things. We begin to withhold our I love yous. We begin to withhold our, oh, you look good today. We begin to withhold all of those complimentary things that build up our husbands because of this feeling of unforgiveness that we're holding on to, this grudge or this, animosity that we have for our husbands for trivial things. When I bet if you were to think back to the last upset conversation that you had with your husband, you may not even remember what it was about. You may not even remember what it was about. You might remember how you felt about it. You remember he said something that made you mad, or he ate the last of your whatever, or he, made you late to church or whatever. But come on, when we think about all that we have been forgiven for, come on. Now, you better give that man some forgiveness. You better give that man some forgiveness. So going back to my point, we put our feelings before our acts. We put our feelings of unforgiveness and our feelings of hurt before the act of forgiving. And like I said, it defeats the whole purpose of forgiving. If you're going to sit up and tell somebody, yeah, I forgive you, but you really don't, or if you wait till you're in a place where whatever this person said or whatever this person did doesn't bother you anymore before you can decide to tell them that you forgive them, you're defeating the whole act of forgiveness. Going back to Jesus dying on the cross, they were hitting him, cursing him out in the midst of all that. In the midst of that, he's talking about God forgive them. I mean, there's not much else you can say. We wait till we feel like we want to forgive somebody, and then we talk about, oh, yeah, I forgive you. When it doesn't even matter anymore. Oh, yeah, I forgive you. But the true essence, for you to really get past something, for you to really have forgiveness in your heart and in your soul, requires you to forgive in the act. So when you and your husband are going back and forth about whatever trivial situation it is, and you know what, it may not even be trivial. It may be a big deal. He might have, spent your rent on a new pair of shoes. I don't know. It might be something pretty significant. And, you may feel like, gosh, why'd you do that? You might be really upset about it, and it might cause a lot of other things to fall out of line. But when you stop and you say, okay, look, this conversation is no longer constructive. My Captain Crunch. If your conversation, if your argument is no longer constructive, and you're both just shooting back and forth, whatever angry comment you can, you're at a place where it's not constructive. You're at a place where you're now trying to hurt and inflict pain. And at that moment, when you feel yourself going to that place, you need to stop. You need to stop, and you need to forgive. That is what the true meaning of forgiveness is. Just stopping where you are, realizing and remembering that you love this person. In that moment, you're like, ooh, I can't stand you. I don't even want to look at your face. But you still love him. He still loves you. And in that moment, you have to retrain your thoughts and remember that this is the person that you love. This is the person that you said I do to. This is the person that, you know, pours into your life. This is the person that prays for you. This is the person that you pray for. This is the person that left their parents to be with you. You know, you have to stop and forgive. Stop where you are and realize you need to forgive. You need to forgive. And because you know what? When you hold on to those thoughts of unforgiveness and all of those feelings of, you know, grudge and just being upset and angry, when you let those things fester and sit, they manifest in other ways. You know, a lot of times we as women, we will withhold, like I said, the compliments, will withhold all of the things that upbuild our husband. And we even fall into the trap of withholding intimacy from our husbands. Like that's some kind of, you know, reward, like that's a reward for him because he's been so good, then we can have some intimacy with him. No. We need to get our minds together when it comes to intimacy. Intimacy is a beautiful thing, and it should never be something that we are doling out to our husband as a reward. And you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about some intimacy, people, married people. So, I mean, we have to remember those things. We should not be keeping to ourselves, holding our intimacy to ourselves because we're upset with our husbands. We shouldn't. You know, you should always have a yes in your spirit. You should always be something that, you know, if you need to make sure that you are fulfilling your role as a wife. You know, that's part of what it means to be a wife, is having a yes in your spirit. You know, your husband, this is kind of going off into a different conversation, but when your husband needs to feel intimacy with you, you need to say yes, have a yes in your spirit. And you know, this is coming from the woman that has 4 kids. But in all honesty, you need to have a yes in your spirit. You need to just, you know, give your husband intimacy. Give your husband intimacy. And you know what? After your intimacy, those are great times to have conversations. This sounds so crazy, but it's true. You know, it's great times to just say some things because you're both in a place where you feel love and you feel like you're, you know, you feel safe, you know, so it's a safe zone and you can have those conversations that are usually harder to do when you're both at, you know, when one person's on one side of the room, the other person's at the other side of the room. So just make sure that you're not withholding certain privileges, if you want to call them that. You're not withholding your intimacy because of a lack of forgiveness. You shouldn't be doing that. It's not healthy for you and it's not healthy for him. It's not healthy for your marriage. The more you do that, the more your husband will feel a lack. And when you're lacking something, and we're not just talking about intimacy, we're talking about just in the natural, when you're lacking something, you try to find things to fill that gap, fill that lack. And you don't want your husband trying to find things to fill that intimacy lack. So regardless of how upset you are or how unforgiving you might feel at the time, fulfill your role. Have a yes in your spirit. Do what you got to do. But we're talking about forgiveness today. We're talking about making sure that you are forgiving. Girl, now you better say that. LaShonda, I don't know how I get off onto these tangents. But anyway, forgiveness. You know, we just need to make sure that we are forgiving in the midst of our anger, in the midst of those situations that don't feel so good, in the midst of those conversations where we're feeling hurt, or the situations where we're feeling pain. We need to forgive in those situations. It's so important. And honestly, when you forgive, when you stop the conversation and you forgive, and this goes into any realm, whether it's business or what have you, when you stop and you say, oh, you know what, I see your point. You pretty much squelch whatever else it is the other person has to say. Anything